My name is Hannah Jines. I am a teacher, first and foremost, and I am a volunteer for the Tampa Bay chapter for AFSP, which is the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And I am the board chair. I do a lot of advocacy work with suicide prevention. I'm very passionate about it because my dad died from suicide in 2009, and that made me look at suicide in a different light before I had lost him. And then I also have my own struggles with depression and anxiety. A time that I will always remember with my dad is just moments where he's always called me his little princess. When he was overseas being deployed for the Navy, he would write me letters and would always start it out with Dear Princess. Even as I got older and went to college, still always started it out with Dear Princess. He told me that I was just his princess. My dad served 25 years in the military and he loved it. It was his life. And when he retired, he really wasn't ready to retire, but it was his time. And he got a job working for the government, and it was a really good job, but the respect that he got in the civilian workforce was very different from the military. He retired as a master chief, so he was way up there, and it just wasn't the same in the work field for him. And he struggled with that because a lot of his identity was with the military. As a dad, he was amazing. I really felt like I had a picture perfect family growing up. When I think about how he died though, and the suicide, kind of feels like that picture has been shattered in certain ways. I remember calling my dad multiple times that day because we would usually talk when I got off of work. He was always really proud of me for being a teacher, and I would talk and tell him about my day, and he loved hearing about it. And he never answered, and I didn't really think much of it. But by about 8 p.m. that night, my uncle called me when I was in my apartment and just said that there had been an accident. And when he said that, I knew it was suicide. I just had this instinct. I don't know why. I knew my dad was having a hard time after he retired from the military and transitioning into that civilian life. And I felt like there was stuff I didn't know about him. He was struggling with alcoholism, and I had no idea until after he died. So I remember being in my apartment. My mom couldn't even tell me. It was my uncle who told me. And I think I called a few friends and just cried that night. I actually woke up that morning and my eyes were so swollen. I had never cried that much. It just did not feel real to me that it's gone. My mom had came to visit me, not this past March, the one before. She came to visit me over my spring break, and the day that she left, she gave me this book. And she said, I found this when I was cleaning. And I was like, okay. So I looked at it. It said a book of poems from dad to daughter. And there was an inscription in it. And it said, Dear Princess, life is precious. Make it more special every day. May God always be in your heart of hearts. Love, Daddy. And it was dated for February of 2009. And he passed January 2009. So that tells me that he had bought this for me ahead of time, written in it. He always did inscriptions to any books he gave us, and had it dated and everything, but it was just never given to me. It made me feel like he literally was always with me. He said he was always by my side, and at that moment he wasn't physically by my side, but I feel him sometimes around me in certain situations, like a presence. This is gonna sound crazy, but like, for example, I do the St. Pete walk every year, and a few years ago I spoke and shared my story at the walk, and it was my first time sharing my story with the amount of people that were there. It was probably like 700 or 800 people. And after I shared my story, we took a group picture at the walk. And there's actually a light shining just on me out of all of like the 8 other people there. It's a light shining just on me. And it was taken after I spoke, so it just made me feel like that was my dad saying like, hey, I'm here. Like, you shared your story. You're doing this in my honor, my memory. Thank you. After my dad died, I was diagnosed with depression. I think I've always had high functioning depression and a lot of anxiety as a child. It just never was diagnosed. And after such a traumatic thing happening, it really exploded. And so I went to therapy on and off. It took me a while to find a therapist at the beginning. And then I also got a medication for depression. And I attended support groups for people who've lost loved ones to suicide. And that was a really big part of my healing, because when you lose someone to suicide, you feel alone, like no one else understands. I didn't know anyone at the time who'd lost someone to suicide. So being able to go to a support group and be around other survivors, we call ourselves survivors because that's what we are, it made me feel like I wasn't alone in this. And this was 10 years ago. So really the word suicide, like, you just wouldn't even say it. People still didn't want to even admit like that my dad really died by suicide at first. So it was really a safe place for me to be open and honest and have people hear me and be honest with me as well. So after those first 3 years, that was really my darkest time, where I had my own thoughts of suicide. And then I don't know what exactly shifted. I feel like it was just the process of healing. But I started to become more aware of myself and thinking, I don't want to be sad and feel sorry for myself anymore. I'm just being scared that I might end up like my dad. It scares me. I know that I've taken so many steps to make sure that doesn't happen by being so self-aware and taking care and managing my mental health. But it still scares me. Thinking about, is that going to happen to me? Am I going to die by suicide? I don't think I will, but who, you don't know. So it's just, having that family history is difficult to live with. And then knowing if I ever have children, I don't want to pass that on. I do believe that our society has created a stigma around suicide. I think we have come a long way as far as getting better at breaking that stigma, but it's still there. When I think back to 10 years ago when my dad died by suicide, it was very stigmatized. I couldn't even say the word suicide, and no one wanted to talk about it. Now, in the last few years, I feel like people are being more open and willing to talk about it a little bit. I think that mental health is just as important as physical health. Mental health is what's going on in your brain. There's so much about our brains we don't even understand. And we need to pay attention and do the research and just learn more about our brains. And what it is we can do to help people who are struggling with mental health. So a lot of people think that talking about suicide is going to put the idea in their head, but research has actually shown that that's not the case. So when you ask someone who's thinking about suicide and they're not, it shows that person that you care enough to ask and that you care about them. If they are thinking about suicide and you ask, that is a sense of relief for them. They're able to be like, wow, I actually can talk to this person about it. They're not scared of me talking to them about my struggles. So it is important that if you see someone who's struggling, that you don't hold back when asking them if they're okay. And it's important that when you ask someone if they're thinking about suicide, that you ask them directly and in a caring way with context. So for my future, I do see myself, continuing to be involved with AFSP. It's been a huge part of my healing, helping people. I'd like to think that I will be able to go on and have a family and still be able to have this good work balance, volunteer balance, social life balance. I just think it's important to be balanced in everything that you're doing. Suicide prevention is my passion. It's something that could never be a job for me. It's something I'm passionate about. And I also need to know that it's something I can always step back from if I'm struggling personally. And that's something in our organization that we really preach to each other is self-care first. If you're going through a hard time and you need to step back from something, that's okay to do.